people who typically will work very hard to try to get the rest of the world to change because they're not able to change themselves. Or there's an incredible narcissism in place which says, I shouldn't have to change. The rest of the world should have to change for me. I probably don't even need to mention certain types of people. I'm sure you can all think of people like this. I mean, individuals, but also groups of people who are like this. They want the whole world to change rather than to change just a little bit of themselves. And this is also why you're going to find that many of these same people are the most incredibly unhappy people that you're ever going to find. And you're going to find these are also the same people who try to make you unhappy. So they'll try to get you to stop telling certain kinds of jokes, to stop laughing at certain kinds of humor. They'll tell you to stop using certain words. They're going to tell you how they're going to redefine words to make them mean something else, to confuse language. These are people who want language to change, who want the world to change simply because they're unable to take account of themselves and change themselves for the better. And even if the whole world changes, the point is you're not going to be more comfortable in it. You're not going to be any happier. In fact, you're going to find yourself even less happy because you're going to be a chaotic personality that's now dominated by chaos around you. You're basically going to be a turd in a sewer. It doesn't make the turd any better, it just makes the sewer water even dirtier. So the way that you actually improve your life and improve your mental states is to change yourself. Because even if you could change the world, there's an incredible narcissism that's in place when you say, I know how the world should be. Do we really? You think about 300,000 years of human history that have brought us to the point that we are right now. It's incredibly narcissistic to think that somehow, some way, we have figured everything out in the past few decades. And that is this prevailing idea. We have figured everything out. We know better than our grandparents did. We know better than past generations. We know better than the rest of the world. Look around at ourselves right now. How's that working for us? Because you're going to focus on something in life, either yourself or the rest of the world. And if you're focusing on the rest of the world, you're not focusing on yourself. That's the only place where you can make an actual real change. I'm trying to figure out if you're uninterested or stumped. I'm going to go anyway, because that's what I do. Right, so I've often laughed at the weaklings who thought themselves good because they had no claws. We have this concept. One of the incredible things about Nietzsche is that you point out he dies in 1900. He died in 1900. And you can divide a lot of the thinking of the world between before Nietzsche and even after Nietzsche. And it's a name that I imagine that until you walked into this class, you may have never heard before. You've heard of some of his sayings, though. Like you've heard of the saying, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Again, that comes from Nietzsche. And I pointed out before that he is talking very specifically about himself. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Because it's a cornerstone of his philosophy that the way that you actually become a better person is by overcoming struggling, by overcoming challenges. So if you remember Frankl, the will to meaning, all of life is geared towards trying to find a meaning and a purpose for life. You look at Freud, the will to pleasure. All of life is geared towards trying to find pleasure in life and minimize pain. And then the third view is Nietzsche, the will to power, the belief that all of human action is geared towards trying to accumulate power. And power doesn't just mean power over other people, because gaining power over other people is not nearly as hard as it sounds. Just put together some really good sentences, say them very convincingly, and you'll find that you'll have incredible power over a lot of people. But what he's talking about is getting power and maintaining power over the most difficult person in the universe to maintain control and power over, which is, of course, yourself. To be able to control yourself. This is why so many people, activists particularly, turn very much towards other people. They want the world to change. Like when you see activists out in the street holding up placards and chanting slogans, a lot of which will rhyme sometimes, they will talk a lot about how much the world has to change. And yet, if you look at their own lives, generally speaking, I have found anyway that most people who are extreme activists, their lives are in complete shambles. They're generally speaking lonely. They're, if not at the very least, alone. That their houses are typically messes. Their personal lives are typically messes. And these are people who typically will work very hard to try to get the rest of the world to change because they're not able to change themselves. Or there's an incredible narcissism in place which says, I shouldn't have to change. The rest of the world should have to change for me. I probably don't even need to mention certain types of people. I'm sure you can all think of people like this. I mean, individuals, but also groups of people who are like this. They want the whole world to change rather than to change just a little bit of themselves. And this is also why you're going to find that many of these same people are the most incredibly unhappy people that you're ever going to find. And you're going to find these are also the same people who try to make you unhappy. So they'll try to get you to stop telling certain kinds of jokes, to stop laughing at certain kinds of humor. They'll tell you to stop using certain words. They're going to tell you how they're going to redefine words to make them mean something else, to confuse language. These are people who want language to change, who want the world to change simply because they're unable to take account of themselves and change themselves for the better. And even if the whole world changes, the point is you're not going to be more comfortable in it. You're not going to be any happier. In fact, you're going to find yourself even less happy because you're going to be a chaotic personality that's now dominated by chaos around you. You're basically going to be a turd in a sewer. It doesn't make the turd any better. It just makes the sewer water even dirtier. So the way that you actually improve your life and improve your mental states is to change yourself. Because even if you could change the world, there's an incredible narcissism that's in place when you say, I know how the world should be. Do we really? You think about 300,000 years of human history that have brought us to the point that we are right now. It's incredibly narcissistic to think that somehow, some way, we have figured everything out in the past few decades. And that is this prevailing idea. We have figured everything out. We know better than our grandparents did. We know better than past generations. We know better than the rest of the world. Look around at ourselves right now. How's that working for us? We have higher rates of suicide, especially among young people, than we've ever had in the history of the world, in very specific places, which are the places that have taken on this ideology that we know better than everybody else. We have higher rates of depression. We have declining life expectancies. We have worse health. We have worse human relations. We're interacting less. We're talking to fewer people. We have fewer friends. We report being less happy than ever before. And so it's worth asking ourselves, why is it that we're being allowed to be indoctrinated with this idea that we have to be angry and miserable all the time? Because if you're angry and miserable, then there's a likelihood that you might seek change of some kind. And so people who want you to become people who want you to become activists, people who want to get you to change the world in the way that they want you to change the world, they don't want you to be happy. And so there's an effort that even in the areas of your life where you would think, well, I should be happy about this. I mean, I don't know how many of you have noticed this tendency in yourselves that something good will happen and you'll immediately think of something bad. Well, it could be, it's not as good as this. Well, it's fine. That was good. But when people ask you how you're doing on a day, is our first reaction to talk about how terrible we're doing, or at least to think about how terrible we're doing, or to find something wrong that's happened in the past 24 hours that we can complain about? And if you think that doesn't affect how you approach the world and how people see you and how you impact the world, then you're just simply not paying attention to the world around you. You're not paying attention to yourself. So, how do you change the world for the better? How do you change your life for the better? Well, tell me if this sounds familiar. You fix yourself. You change these things about yourself. Not for any other reason except that it's going to improve your life. Oh, and by the way, in doing so, you're going to improve the world around you as well. So how do you improve the world? You improve yourself. And why do you do it? Just because it's the right thing to do to improve yourself. And what you're going to find is that the more effort that you put into improving yourself, the more you're going to improve your life, the more the better you're going to, the more you're going to influence people around you positively. But that is so hard to improve ourselves, to fix ourselves. It's much easier to come along and say, you know what we should do? We should pass a law that you can't buy sodas over 20 ounces, which, by the way, was a law that was passed in New York. Wouldn't it make sense just to say, you know what, I'm just not going to drink sodas that are more than 20 ounces? No, I have to make sure that everybody doesn't do it. Why don't you just not do it yourself? It's your own life, it's your own body. Why do you have to make that decision for everybody else? Because people are drinking too much soda. What in your mind makes you think that you can come along and dictate for the rest of the world how they should think and believe? Well, it's because they don't know, but you do. Yeah, don't you realize that's how totalitarians come about? That's how fascism comes about. We need to decide. This small group needs to decide for everybody else because they just don't know. When you turn the focus away from yourself, because you're going to focus on something in life, either yourself or the rest of the world. And if you're focusing on the rest of the world, you're not focusing on yourself. That's the only place where you can make an actual real change. So when Nietzsche is talking about the importance of overcoming suffering, the way that you make yourself better is not to pass silly legislation and make other people obey you by law. The way that you act, which by the way, is the matter of weaklings. Don't you notice that weaklings are always the ones who are always appealing to the law and saying, well, I'm gonna, that's against the law. Well, that's against the law. That's against the law. There should be a law against. We should check the rules. We should see if this is allowed. By who? By people who are stronger than yourself. Like when people will say, fighting is never the answer. War is never the answer. If any of you believe that war is never the answer, if any of you believe that fighting is never the answer, let me know. Let me know and have your wallets and purses ready. Because I'm going to come along and I'm going to take your shit. And what will you do? Will you just sit there and go, you shouldn't do that? But I am virtuous and I will do nothing about it. Is that really virtuous? Or will you call the police and you'll let somebody else do the fighting for you? Because it's not that you're really virtuous. It's not that you really believe that fighting is never the answer. It's just that you realize that if you do get into a fight, it's not going to go your way. There's something that's happened to us in this culture where, especially for you young men, I'm worried about you guys, man. I'm worried about you guys because you're growing up in a society that's telling you that your very nature itself is toxic. That just being yourself is toxic and bad. And that's scary as hell. It's like I sit there and go, no wonder so many of you guys have your faces stuck in phones. It's no wonder so many of you guys are trying to live in some kind of alternate reality world because your life is shit in this one. And I don't say that with disdain, man. I say that with care and concern and love. You've been made to feel like you don't matter and like your very existence is bad, and that your whole virtue in life is to be harmless. The greatest virtue of your life is to be harmless, which is 100% absolutely not. And it's terrible for everybody because hopefully something that we have gathered this semester, or actually this year, is that there are serpents in the garden. We go back to the story of Adam and Eve. We talked about this a little bit. That's the whole point of that story, man. There's this perfect garden with this perfect wall, with everything is perfect, and yet, why does the serpent show up? Why is the serpent allowed to show up? Where do serpents go? Where do snakes go? Anywhere they want. If a snake wanted to get into this room, we build all these walls around it. How's the snake going to get in? Snakes find a way to get in. Snakes do that. You cannot protect yourself against the appearance of serpents. What you can do is learn how to protect yourself against serpents when they do appear. And if your whole life you're being told that you're supposed to be harmless and that you're supposed to kind of walk around and not present any kind of danger and not be dangerous, man, you should be dangerous. Every single one of you in this room should be capable of doing terrible, terrible harm. Terrible, terrible harm. And once you realize that you are capable of doing terrible, terrible things, I hope that you will wake up every day and decide not to. That's virtue. And you all are capable of doing terrible harm. Understand what I mean when I say this. How hard would it be for any of you guys to get a hold of a firearm and show up here and shoot up the school? I imagine most of you could get a hold of one if you really put your mind to it. You could find a way to do it. And once you realize that you're capable of something that terrible, you might say, well, I could never do that. But you're capable of it, hopefully. And I mean hopefully because then when you decide not to do it, that means you are virtuous. If you're not capable of doing harm, if you're not capable of being a terrible person, if you're not capable of ill virtue, then you're not virtuous. The only way to be virtuous is to be capable of doing harm and choosing every day, every minute in some cases, not to do it. People who carry out harm, these are bad people. So if you remember, I won't fault you if you don't, but in the second week of school this year, I asked you if you were living in Germany in the 1930s, how many of you really realized you would have been a concentration camp guard? If you were drafted in the German army and you're put in charge of a concentration camp, do you realize that you'd have been a camp guard just like everybody else? And you might think, well, no, not me. If that's your immediate reaction, I would suggest to you that you probably don't know yourself very well. Because if the last few years have taught us anything, it's the power of what just social pressure can cause and lead people into. Now imagine if it's not just social pressure. Imagine if it's not just people on Twitter, I'm not calling it X, are calling you bad names or mean names. But imagine if you weren't just afraid of getting called out and canceled. Imagine if you were actually afraid of being murdered and your whole family murdered and thrown in these concentration camps. Whether you'd be capable of doing the things that those guards did. It's not that they happily wanted to, it's that they were capable of it. And so once you recognize that you're capable of doing terrible harm, now you also realize, by the way, that you have a lot more power over your own life than you realize. There's this movie, I don't know if any of you have ever seen it, called Office Space. It's a great movie, you should see it. It's on many levels. It's called Office Space. But there's this guy who, name is Milton, and he talks like this, and he sits at a desk, and everybody in the office just like, nobody gives him any respect, except for one guy. And he just sits there, and they always tell him, hi, Milton. And the thing is that they fired him, but they never told him. I'm sorry, they never told payroll, so he's been getting paid, even though he's not actually working there anymore. It was just an oversight by their payroll department. So they're like, well, we're just gonna stop paying him. And they keep like moving his desk, and every time they move his desk, he says, well, I'm gonna keep my stapler. That's like his big thing in life, he wants to keep his stapler. And finally, at one point, they move him down to the basement. He's like surrounded by a bunch of boxes and everything. He's just down there by himself. And then the boss comes over and takes his stapler and says, hey, we're gonna need that stapler. And he's like, well, don't take, and the guy leaves like, oh, okay. I'm gonna burn the building down. And it's funny when he says it. Guess what he does at the end of the movie? He burns the building down. This is a guy who all along was capable of doing something horrible and terrible, and nobody just believed it. But it was just every day he held back and maintained his virtuous status. The idea is that you master yourself. You're not virtuous if you have no claws, if you're not capable of being a terrible person. And that can happen in lots of ways. It doesn't have to mean that you go out now and learn how to fight and beat everybody up or capable of it. No, even just realize how many reputations could you destroy through anonymous accounts online. You have the capability of doing that. But choosing not to is virtuous, and everything in between, starting a nuclear war down to destroying people's reputations, everything in between. If you have the capability, the capacity, but it's important to recognize your capacity for two reasons. First off, three reasons. First off, it helps you to know yourself. Secondly, it helps you to understand that you have power and control over your own life. And this is one of the reasons that people end up frustrated and angry. We feel like we have no control over our own lives. You have way more control than you realize. Way more control than you realize. Good. Yeah. From like 10 minutes ago, he has his hand up. We have to be mindful of it. And the reason I say we have to be mindful of it is because, like, if I were to come along and, let's say you're walking down the street, and I were to pull alongside you in a white van, jump out, grab you, throw you in the back of the white van, hog tie you, and drive off, you probably have some questions, but you'd probably be pretty pissed off about it. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, if you were just like, can't wait to see where this goes, there's something wrong with you. But if you're upset about it, you're reacting in the way that you should react. So far, so good. But if I come along and rather than kidnapping you, I just give you some propaganda and control your mind, we don't think anything of it. We think nothing of that. I don't have to kidnap you. I can just, if I have the proper combination of words, I can take control of your mind. It's one of the reasons that we study the things that we say. This whole class is geared around rhetoric, argumentation. Why is it that we study the things that we study? I don't mean to just ramble here, but I'm going to anyway. Like I see these things on Instagram all the time where it's like, school was such a waste. I never learned how to pay taxes or how to do a rental agreement. The real life stuff. Really, dude? You guys want to, raise your hand. How many of you guys want to study rental agreements in here? Okay, then don't let me catch any of you on Instagram complaining about that in a couple of years. How many of you in here want to learn how to do taxes in your math class? All right. I'm sure some of you do want to do that. You just want to raise your hands. I wouldn't mind doing it in math class, but then again, that's because I was, as you guys know, my math teacher told me I was basically retarded and wouldn't learn math anyway. So maybe that's why I'm like, ooh, taxes, let's learn them. But your tax forms, when you guys get jobs, those of you who have jobs, and you pay your taxes, you'll know. You read the form, it says, you have your W-2 form and you have your tax form. It'll say, plug in the number from box 1A into here. So you go, oh, it says 1,700, and you write down 1,700. That's all that it is. It's basic reading, basic math, adding and subtracting. That's it. If you can add and subtract, you can do your taxes. If you can read, you can do your taxes. That's it. There's nothing more to it. Rental agreement. You're telling me you never learned how to read in school? Of course you did. So you can do all that stuff. But there's other stuff too, and there's so much more to life than just taxes and rental agreements, man. There's purchasing agreements, not just rental agreements. You can buy a house, not just rent a house. Yeah, but how do you get that? The way you get it is you learn how to think. Because I don't know what you guys are going to have to know in 10 years. Anybody who comes along and says, in 10 years, you're going to have to know how to fill in the blank, they're full of shit. They don't know what you're going to have to do. I don't know what you're going to have to do. I have no clue. And I've never come in here and told you guys, you're going to have to know this stuff in life. What I have told you is that this is stuff, for example, that has made millions of people's lives better. It's helped them to cope with some of the difficulties of life. These aren't my ideas. These are the ideas of the smartest people who have ever lived, who've come along and telling you, here are things that have been very helpful for people. What I do know is you're going to have to know how to think. You're going to have to be able to figure things out. You're going to have to be able to problem solve. I'm telling you now, the way that you problem solve is not going to be to type into ChatGPT, what does I have often laughed at the weaklings who thought themselves good because they had no claws mean? You know, if that's the case, understand what you've done is you've been kidnapped. You've handed over your mind. And you might think like, oh, but it's just to get through. Yeah, I imagine that's probably most of your life. Well, it's because I don't understand it. How much time have you spent trying to understand it? Versus how much time have you spent fastened to that screen whose whole job, whose whole function in life is to kidnap your mind. It's the whole reason it exists. It's the only reason it exists. What is it that the people who create these things know that the rest of us don't know, that they won't give these things to their kids? How come they don't carry these devices? What do they know that we don't know, or that we do know? Let's face it, we know. We just don't want to accept it. That's fine. It's fine, just know what it is that you're not accepting. But also don't be the weakling who thinks yourself good because you have no claws. Don't be the person who thinks yourself wise, you have no reason to think so. Don't be the person who fill in the blank when you fill in the blank. Be honest with yourself. It's not me telling you this. I don't know why so many people get so pissed at me for just saying this thing I'm saying. Understand yourself. You want me to understand, then you go into yourself and you start to understand yourself. That's when people open up their eyes and like, fuck you, Scanlon. How? Because you encountered yourself for a second. I don't tell you this because I want to be popular. Of course, this is not going to be popular with the dozen or so eyes that are glaring at the moment. But hopefully make you understand yourself a bit better. You're not good if you have no claws. You're good if you realize you have claws, and you do have claws. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Yeah.